So a lot of what we know about the biology of language actually came about by surveying problems that actually happen to occur due to injury, basically injuries to the head or some kind of stroke, that kind of thing. One example of that is aphasia. Aphasia is the loss of the ability to speak or understand language. Reading and writing might be affected as well, but that's not always the case. Sometimes you can have a difficulty speaking, but not have a problem with reading and writing and so on. But that's called aphasia. Paul Broca in 1861 was a physician who had a subject who was a 51-year-old man named Leborn, although they called him Tan because that was one of the few syllables he could actually pronounce, was Tan. He understood much of what was said to him and could answer numerical questions by raising the fingers on his hand to answer and so forth. But he died shortly after Broca examined him, and when Broca did the autopsy, they found that there was damage to the left frontal lobe due to a stroke. That particular area, you can see that here in yellow, is referred to as Broca's area. Leborn would be diagnosed today, anyway, with Broca's aphasia, which is basically a difficulty producing speech. Speech that the patient produces when they do manage to produce speech is slow and effortful, but generally makes sense. But that's typically the result of damage to Broca's area. Karl Wernicke published observations on another language deficit, another type of aphasia called Wernicke's aphasia. This affected the area of the brain known as Wernicke's area, and that you can see here in red. It's near the primary auditory cortex and the temporal lobe, and that affects comprehension. In this particular case, speech is rapid as opposed to Broca's aphasia. Speech is rapid and fluent, and it even has correct grammar, but the speech itself is meaningless. And what's worse is the person who has Wernicke's aphasia doesn't even realize that this is happening. So they're not in any distress, but they're talking like what they're saying is meaningful, and it's not meaningful at all. So people have thought in the past, well, these must be sort of centers for language, where all language is located. But I think that's kind of overly simplistic to assume that the brain has only two main language centers. Instead, I think these are really key places for language to be processed. But of course, language and the circuits required for language are located all over the brain. So there's complex pathways for processing language that connect Broca's and Wernicke's areas to other areas of the cortex, the cerebral cortex, that are involved in cognition.